Welcome to Liberty and Order in the New Republic. This is Melinda Cole Klein. The American Revolution had produced a desire by the lower orders of society existing below the middle class to enjoy a level of equality across the main aspects of life, which would include politics, economics, and the social order. This was not by design. This is not the outcome the Founding Fathers envisioned in their working class population. Segments of common folk formerly excluded from the exercise of political power were among local leaders and representatives in the newly formed government. The political majority, moneyed and learned men of commerce, trade, and land, failed in their efforts to end this trend. In the post-colonial years, these 5 factors dominated Republican livelihoods. Number 1, conflict in Europe with Napoleonic France. Number 2, the World War that brought America into the conflict, breaking the established neutrality. Number 3, internal political problems, such as Federalists versus Republican-Democrats, specifically on the idea revolving around a centralized government versus states' rights. Number 4, government relations with France, Spain, and England. And number 5, economic survival, territorial expansion, and citizen rights. Democracy happened in America between 1776 and 1791, but its future was uncertain, its institutions fragile and unproven, while there loomed no guarantees about its success. Common folk had contributed their lives, home economies, and incomes to win the war. In New England and the middle colonies, men with little resources or political power had long been accustomed to regulating their own local governments. Hundreds of thousands voted and had filled some political niche in their community when needed. It would be this experience and the political debates that resulted that would increase the voting population in America to the extremes not seen across time and histories of civilized states. The framers of the Constitution tried to balance domestic rule by election against the fear of a runaway democracy. Even with the Bill of Rights, this was not achieved. Within 5 years of its ratification, new forms of democratic politics emerged. By 1812, Europe had been at war with Napoleonic France for close to a decade, and the French Republic through most of the 1790s. The American War of 1812, that lasted until 1815, fought against the British Empire, threatened the new independence of this young republic. The USA came very close to losing its newly found political, social, and economic freedoms to the British Empire in this war. Briefly, the French Napoleonic Wars followed the French Revolutionary Wars in the 1790s in an attempt to control Europe. Both conflicts were military in nature that in time involved most of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula, Egypt, and Syria. While infamous battles contain a long and heroic list, Horatio Nelson, the most famous British admiral and inspirational leader among his men, is best remembered for his contribution to the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. The influence of Napoleon targeted the political, social, and economic power of the upper classes. The ancient regime practices that considered aristocratic forms of justice, such as being above the law, were abolished wherever French armies went. Secondly, aristocratic privileges, such as not paying taxes, were eliminated in all places except Poland. The new French Republic endorsed the Napoleonic Code. It made all people equal before the law, established jury systems, and legalized divorce. Napoleon was more modern than his autocratic predecessors. He embraced certain aspects of liberalism. He expanded the public education system and restructured the French legal system. All the while, he rejected a government body that was the product of a voting public, such as what we have here in America, a representative democracy. In addition, Napoleon understood the influence of a free press and what it could have in regards to persuading public opinion. For this reason, under this emperor, there was no free press. I would like to take a moment to mention some notable books and films in regards to the Napoleonic Wars. Recently, since the 1990s and the early 2000s, there was a series of books published by Bernard Cornwell. They're called the Sharpe novels. There's about 20 of them, and they, for me, I definitely recommend these as a fictional read. They're very interesting. In particular, I enjoyed Richard Sharpe and the Battle of Trafalgar, 1805. Richard Sharpe is the perfect hero as an underdog, an English orphan who joined the British Army, 1799. Anyway, so if you want to read one of these books as historical fiction, I definitely recommend them. Another film series by A&E are called Horatio Hornblower. These were produced by BBC in 1999. Definitely a favorite film series. And then, of course, there was Master and Commander that came out in 2003 with Russell Crowe by 20th Century Fox. As a political philosopher, Thomas Jefferson idolized the American small business entrepreneur and farmer as possessing Republican virtue. This intellectual president came to the office with well-formed ideas of the way a state should be run. Unlike the Federalists, Thomas Jefferson was distrustful of urban elites and bankers. He favored states' rights and believed that the future of America lay in sustaining a limited federal government. Jefferson and James Madison founded and led the Republican Party, which eventually became the Republican-Democratic Party. This resulted in the first party system. Jefferson, at the end of 1793, retired to Monticello, where he continued to politically oppose Alexander Hamilton and George Washington. A presidential candidate in 1796, Thomas Jefferson, with 3 electoral votes short, came in second to John Adams. Because of the political system at the time, before the 12th Amendment of 1804, Jefferson became vice president to John Adams as a runner-up. The Federalists under John Adams had built a small naval force and a standing army. To pay for this and other federal expenses, the government under Adams levied new taxes and readied for war that could erupt any time during the 1790s as France invaded nations across Europe and into North Africa. Jefferson and Madison gained popular support from Americans by writing the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. This political essay declared, quote, that the federal government had no right to exercise powers not specifically delegated to it by the states. Should the federal government assume such power, its acts could be voided by a state. End of quote. The Jefferson-Madison team argument in the resolutions became the official response in favor of states' rights. For average Americans, they found this message most attractive. In the end, the presidential election of 1800 had to be decided by Congress. Senator Aaron Burr of New York and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, the incumbent vice president, ran for presidential office against the presidential incumbent, Federalist John Adams, and his vice presidential running mate, Charles Pinckney. In the 1796 election, Thomas Jefferson had run against John Adams and, as mentioned, lost only 3 electoral votes short. As was customary at the time until 1804, the second runner-up became vice president. Election year of 1800. Federalists desired strong ties with Britain and a government structure that was strong from the top down. Federalists and Republican Democrats differed on economic principles and the general direction the country should take. Meanwhile, Federalists supported a loose interpretation of the Constitution with an emphasis of power at the federal level, and the Republican Democrats supported a strict interpretation of the U.S. Constitution with an emphasis of power at the state level. Neither Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson, or John Adams received enough votes to be a clear winner for president in this election. While Burr was a Federalist and the House of Representatives was controlled by the members of the Federalist Party, you would think Burr would have been chosen as president in 1800. But this is not how it went down. Burr was a bit of a hothead and considered a radical, even by his own party. Alexander Hamilton convinced the House of Representatives that Thomas Jefferson was the lesser political evil of the 3. The vote went to the 36th ballot before Thomas Jefferson was elected as president. This issue drove a wedge between not only Burr and Jefferson, but Burr and Hamilton, in time resulting in a duel in which Hamilton died. Yes, this was a very bitter election year. As the 3rd President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson did not have many friends because of his political ideas. But these ideas became the foundation of the modern USA enjoyed today. Jefferson favored farmers and small business entrepreneurs, along with a weak centralized government with power held at the state level. But Jefferson's victory did not come easy. He was condemned in the North for his views on slavery by some, while rumors circulated that Jefferson and one of his slaves had produced children. While common and expected by Southern planters, this type of behavior was considered scandalous by non-Southerners. With the election won, political power shifted from the Federalists to the Republicans, members mostly of the Southern aristocracy and self-made men of the gentry, the middle class. Jefferson was on the side of the yeoman farmer and of merchants, frontiersmen that made arable land out of forest and contributed to the national economy through agricultural production, while merchants connected rural to urban with long-distance trade connections. He favored lowering taxes and boosting commercial trade as well. Definition of citizenship in the new republic. The American Republic defines citizenship like the ancient Greeks who practiced a direct democracy with economic independence. Citizenship belonged to those who had proved to be financial self-sufficient individuals such as property owners who possessed a value of worth to their respected communities. Dependents such as women, children, students, and other persons would not become citizens in the new republic. After leaving the presidency, Thomas Jefferson continued to be active in public affairs. He became increasingly attached to the idea of founding a university in Virginia. Jefferson in his youth attended the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg. In his vision, this college would be free of church influences, where students could specialize in many new areas not offered at other universities. His dream was realized in 1819 with the founding of the University of Virginia. Opened in 1825, the University of Virginia was then the first to offer a broad variety of elective courses to its students outside of core classwork. It was one of the largest building projects of its time in Virginia, and its design differed from other campuses. At the center of the campus was not a church, but it was the library, like what we enjoy today. Scholars have noted that Jefferson became an active campus visitor and speaker, and students and faculty were regularly invited to his home to debate and argue current topics of the day. We can only imagine how enjoyable such an evening would have been. In Jefferson's vision, any citizen could attend the university based solely on student ability. American settlers kept moving west after the Revolution. Meanwhile, British forts existed in the Northwest, which were formerly French forts, along with Indian groups and the Spanish forts further south. All of these groups, along with the frontiersmen, fought for the best land and access to natural resources, along with the rights to travel the Mississippi River. There were tight government controls to new settlers coming to the Ohio Valley. Delaware, Shawnee, and Iroquois Indians living in this area refused to cede lands to settlers favored by government expansion. However, by the 1790s, Washington sent in his militia. But unlike the Ohio War before the 7 Years' War, the British did not help Native Americans. In the end, Native Americans gave up millions of acres of land to Washington, located in present-day Ohio. Kentucky and Tennessee were in early stages of statehood, which was a bloody transition as well. The Spanish still retained large tracts of land in North America. These included control of provinces from Florida to Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, and California to the British border in Canada, somewhere around present-day Oregon, Washington region. The Spanish government decided to sell their territories to white settlers with or without slaves to help their own economy and people. White Protestant settlers, among others to include minority groups, were encouraged to immigrate from the U.S. into Spanish provinces, as these areas were very sparsely populated by Spanish people, and the Americans would help the overall Spanish economy. This open-door immigration policy by Spain stood in glaring contrast to the restricted policies of the Republic of Mexico. Mexico became a post-Spanish republic in 1821. By the 1830s, the Mexican government moved to create a strong centralized government. This progressed forward through the multiple residences and presidencies of General Santa Anna. In an attempt to control their own population, Mexico became anti-American. In this new political climate, Americans living in Mexico saw their livelihoods threatened, as did the Mexicans and Indians living in Mexican northern territories. In time, a war would result in which Mexico ceded its northern territories to the United States of America for a fixed price. During his presidency, the size of Jefferson's America doubled. Congress deliberated over the Louisiana Territory, its price, and its acquisition. After all, purchasing a new territory is not the traditional way. The traditional way of acquisition of new territorial lands is usually done through war. But Napoleon needed money to fund his war against Europe, and he jumped at the chance to rid himself of a distant territory over which the French government had questionable rights too. In 1808, a few years after the treaty, Napoleon invaded Spain, then Portugal, which began a chain of independent movements of former colonies of New Spain. In Jefferson's view, Napoleon's empire needed money, and Americans needed more land for the growing number of settlers that were heading west. In Jefferson's view, purchasing the Louisiana Territory was a boon to the economy. The following year, Jefferson in 1804 was re-elected president. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory was the largest acquisition of U.S. territory from a foreign nation, about 820,000 square miles. As pointed out on this map, the territory added to the nation's boundaries include Louisiana Territory, later the purchase of Florida, which equaled to about 60,000 square miles from Spain, provinces of California and New Mexico, about 525,000 square miles, and also northern boundary lines that were drawn between British Canada and the United States, finalized through treaty, which added the present states of Washington and Oregon. The Federalists again were not happy. Federalists saw, with the growing number of states admitted to the Union, this resulted in territorial expansion, which would diminish their power and authority, and it would continue to degrade, as history shown that it did. Some radical Federalists took matters into their own hands. In Massachusetts, Federalist extremists, known as the Essex Junto, led by Aaron Burr, promoted the idea that New England should cede from the Union and create their own republic. Other Federalists, like Alexander Hamilton, did not agree and refused the group their support and thought it was a wild claim. Aaron Burr decided in 1804 to run for governor of New York. Alexander Hamilton accused him in print of being a despicable character. 4 years earlier, in the presidential election of 1800, it was Hamilton that convinced the House of Representatives to approve the election of Thomas Jefferson. After this slight in print, in the 1804 governor's race, Burr steamed. Hamilton's opinion was printed and reprinted. Burr did not win the election and blamed Hamilton for the slander. He challenged Hamilton to a duel of pistols to retain his honor and reputation. Hamilton didn't want to accept, but he didn't want to be seen as a coward. On a July morning in 1804, Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton, who died not long after. While the British and French governments and their army and navies were battling for supremacy from Egypt to the West Indies, the United States traded not only with Britain, but also France. The American economy depended on trade and commerce with these countries, but had declared itself neutral, thereby they tried to carry on trade relations as normal. For example, in 1803, trade between the United States and these two nations tallied at $32 million. By 1807, this sum tripled itself to $108 million. Since the Revolution, the United States had difficulties with Britain regarding trade rights and travel on the high seas. All the while, Thomas Jefferson inherited the diplomatic problems regarding trade rights and the American goals to remain neutral. By 1807, President Jefferson became convinced that something had to be done. By attempting to keep American seamen safe from impressment into the British Navy, Congress approved a move to bar all foreign trade. Jefferson believed that if we did not trade with these nations, they would, under economic pressure, respect American neutrality and trade rights. While this tactic was not to purchase British goods during the Stamp Act resistance was effective in 1765, as it pressured the British government to back down, Jefferson's economic scheme did not work. By 1807, it was estimated that 6,000 American sailors were pressed into service by the British. While the British paid the Navy better wages, the Americans believed the British government were forcibly taking American sailors from our ships and pressing them into service to fight their war with Napoleonic France. Jefferson wanted to stop this practice as an apparent seizure of sailors and American citizens in general. But he felt war was coming soon. After putting a bill to Congress, the U.S. government restricted all trade with foreigners. Unfortunately, because of French access to supplies from a variety of sources now under their control in Europe, the Embargo Act not only hurt American trade, but it did not give the desired result. And in doing so, it has been estimated that 30,000 sailors and merchant seamen immediately were out of a job. Not only did this affect the men and boys working on ships bound for trade in foreign ports, but this affected farmers, ship owners, port-bound craftsmen, and artisans supporting maritime trade and commerce. This law was in effect for 15 months. During that time, supplies and goods piled up on wharfs or were spoiled in warehouses. Some resorted to smuggling or shipping goods to Canada, from which goods could be shipped to overseas vendors. This act ruined family economies and for the first time diminished the president's reputation. The United States was woefully unprepared to fight the British in the War of 1812. In one respect alone, the U.S. naval force was not even 25% of that of the Royal Navy. Because of this and the naval blockade imposed by the British, because U.S. merchant vessels were trading with France, the U.S. naval their force in particular was mismanaged as an affair and strategically characterized as a hit-and-miss venture. Meanwhile, on land, until Napoleon stepped down and was captured in 1814, the war with America was a limited affair. However, by 1814, with the availability of a full complement of British troops to invade America, the war became a full-scale invasion. James Madison, the president during the War of 1812, was a towering intellect, an outspoken political leader of the age. While he came off to others as quiet and distant, he was one of the most brilliant men in America at the time. On June 4, 1812, President Madison asked Congress to declare war on Britain, testing America's independence and military ability. In his plea to Congress, Madison lists his reasons. They included interfering with trade on the high seas, inciting Indian attacks on the frontier, and the most important issue was the impressment of American seamen. If you would like to view a good film on the War of 1812, I suggest you view the History Channel's First Invasion, War of 1812, the first DVD in the series. It summarizes the president and society and culture of the early republic set against grievances with Britain during and after the Napoleonic Wars. This film by the History Channel highlights the burning of Washington, D.C., evacuation of its citizens and government, character and bravery by Dolly Madison and her husband, the battle for Baltimore that began on September 11, 1814, and ended after a 25-hour artillery assault by the British Navy onto Fort McHenry at the dawn hours of September 14th. At the dawn's early light, and with the flags still flying the following day, it was evident to the British that they would not be able to take Fort McHenry, while merchants had sunk their ships blocking the entrance to Baltimore by sea. The British retreated, leaving the Chesapeake Bay. Mary Pickersgill was a maker of colors living in Baltimore. A skilled craftswoman, she ran her own business. Commissioned by the government, Pickersgill made 2 flags for the defense of Fort McHenry. One, a smaller flag known as a storm flag, and a larger ensign 30 feet by 42 feet. These flags were flown during the 25-hour bombardment of the fort September 13th and 14th. Pickersgill was paid $544.74 for her 2 flags. When the British attacked Baltimore, Francis Scott Key saw Mrs. Pickersgill's flags while he was held captive on a British ship. Such a vision, combined with being a witness to the bombardment of Fort McHenry, inspired him to compose a poem. His poem, sung to a popular British drinking tune, was called The Defense of Fort McHenry. It soon was renamed the Star-Spangled Banner. By 1931, during the height of the Great Depression, Congress approved the motion to adopt the song as the national anthem. A Smithsonian artifact, the large ensign is undergoing an $18 million restoration. With the capture of Napoleon in 1814, British and American diplomats sought to find peace. The Treaty of Ghent was signed Christmas Eve, 1814. President Madison wanted to negotiate for peace. Napoleon was captured, and it didn't make any sense any longer to be at war, because America had traded with France and wanted to continue the right to trade with anyone, regardless of the political climate. John Quincy Adams was sent to Belgium to negotiate a settlement for peace with the British. By Christmas Eve, as mentioned, of 1814, a peace settlement had been reached. Everyone thought the war was over, except word was very late getting to the military conflicts around New Orleans, a hot spot of fighting. All the while, British reinforcements had invaded Louisiana. Americans sought to hold it. All this led to the Battle of New Orleans in January 1815, after the treaty was signed. A great victory for Americans, and created a new American hero, Andrew Jackson, who was general of the Southern Army. Andrew Jackson had lived as a lawyer, small-time politician, and was an Army officer. During the War of 1812, Britain had excellent financing for this war and possessed the ability and manpower to move men and machinery over great distances quickly. But the war with France had a higher priority. So in 1812, 1813, mostly this was a defense action in the United States until 1814. In North America, the British often won battles against the Americans, but ultimately the war was called off through negotiation. After the capture of Napoleon, U.S. and British diplomatic relations arrived at the conclusion they would rather conduct business and create a healthy economy than fight one another.